And we are back with the third segment of the GSMC Basketball Podcast presented by the GSMC Sports Network. I'm out of breath for some reason. And in this third segment, we're going to be looking at all of the preseason games that ended up going down yesterday, and we'll go ahead and talk about some of the stories that were around in some of these games, as well as some key players in these matchups. And obviously, since it's preseason, you don't really expect many starters to be playing in the preseason, and that's exactly what happened in this, for the Dallas Mavericks at least, in this matchup against the Memphis Grizzlies. And so, again, I mentioned before that Ja Morant left the game due to an ankle injury. However, he did end up producing 13 points, as well as recording 4 rebounds and 3 assists for the Memphis Grizzlies. He wasn't the leading scorer for the Grizzlies, obviously, since he had to leave early, but aside from that, he was the leading scorer, in the starting lineup for the Memphis Grizzlies. So, assuming he can stay healthy, then it seems like the Memphis Grizzlies are going to be a rather solid team. Now, in this game, the Mavericks, they were chanting out Klay Thompson. They were like, "We want Klay. We want Klay." And it was obviously this is good. This is good coming in from a lot of the Mavericks fans and for the Mavericks and their overall morale in Klay Thompson. If you guys remember the previous season, morale on Klay Thompson wasn't all that high. And over the offseason, you can argue that it got even worse because everyone was talking about Klay Thompson's horrible performance and how he went 0 for 10 or 0 for 11 in that elimination game. I believe it was 0 for 10, but I forget exactly what number it was. But he missed every single shot. And a lot of people, they sort of assumed that this was the end of Klay Thompson and that Klay Thompson was going to fall off, and this was going to be the fall off for Klay. But to be fair, Klay didn't really play all that bad in the previous season. I mean, he still shot around 39% from 3, which I think is very solid. It's just, and on top of that, the confidence that he's getting from these fans could also help him throughout majority of the season, because now he has a fandom that's completely behind him and that supports him in all of his, despite all of the mess ups that happened last season. They want him to succeed. And when a shooter has confidence, that is one of the most dangerous shooters ever. And it doesn't matter how mediocre they could be. When they have confidence, and it seems like every shot goes in. I mean, you can look at Grayson Allen for an example. I remember on Christmas, he was so confident. He ended up making, I think, 7 threes in the first quarter or something like that. It was a ridiculous number and something that has never even been done before. And even, there's so many random players that have recently scored 40 points or even 30 points or 50 points. Eric Gordon is one of the players that comes to mind, where when he was on, he was on. And this is sort of like a trend that happens now with a bunch of shooters in this league. Whenever a shooter is confident, they're incredibly dangerous. And this is good for the Mavericks. Now, for the Mavericks, Jaden Hardy was their best player, ended the game with 21 points and also recorded 8 assists as well. And it seems that a lot of players on the Dallas bench actually produced pretty efficiently. I mean, you have Oliver I can't pronounce that middle name. Maxence, forgive me if I messed up that last name. Prosper, and he ended that game with 14 points. And then there was also Jazian Gortman, who ended the game with 19 points, 3 rebounds, and 3 assists, along with 4 steals as well. So it seems that there is a chance that the Mavericks could actually have some sort of depth. Again, we have to see how the preseason plays out, and again, how the rotations are going to play out for this Dallas Mavericks team. But if they have a solid bench and they have a solid bench that can produce, that's one good thing that they have going into this next season that they previously didn't have. Because in the finals matchup and throughout most of the playoffs, it was really you give Luka and Kyrie the ball and everyone gets out of the way and gets ready to set up the play. And it worked up until the point when they matched up against a team that was full of perimeter defenders and ended up slowing them down. Mainly slowing Kyrie down. They couldn't really slow down Luka because it's very difficult to slow down Luka, but they did slow down Kyrie. So in this matchup, I mean, obviously the Mavericks ended up losing. The score was 121 to 116 in favor of Memphis, but it they showed some good things in this loss. So, and that's really like the more important thing when looking at preseason losses. Like if you can show positivities despite losing, then you're in a much better spot than a lot of teams would expect. Next matchup is the Orlando Magic against the Pelicans. Pelicans ended up winning 106 to 104, and Zion ended up playing in this game, which I'm a little bit surprised. I expected the Pelicans to be resting all of their starters, but no. DeJounte Murray, CJ McCollum, and Zion Williamson ended up playing in this matchup. Zion, he scored 16, ended up with 8 rebounds as well. DeJounte Murray only had 6 points, but he did record 6 assists. None of them played more than 20 minutes, so I guess that's something that's really solid, but still, I don't agree with starting or even playing starters in the preseason because, again, there's a huge chance, especially with Zion, that some of these players get injured. So I don't really agree with that. Now, Jordan Hawkins for the Pelicans ended the game with 18 points, 2 assists, and 1 rebound as well. And that was really like all of the solid performances coming in from the bench. And again, Zion, he ended up going 8 for 11. I forgot to mention that too, by the way. Daniel Tice was also pretty solid. Ended the game with 6 for 7 from the field, 13 points, and 1 for 1 from 3. They're going to need a lot more shooting coming in from Daniel Tice, so that way that sort of allows Zion Williamson to dominate in the painted area and in the restricted area a little bit more easily, as opposed to a team that might have a rim protector in the future. Again, we have no idea whether or not the Pelicans are going to address their rim protector situation, but so far it looks like they have a very solid team, but we'll have to see as the season develops. Paolo Banchero also ended up playing in this game. He ended up playing 22 minutes, which I don't agree with. Again, I am heavily against playing the starters in a preseason game. But he did play rather well. He ended up being the Magic's leading scorer, go figure. Ended the game 5 for 7 from the field with 15 points. So very solid outing from Paolo. I expect a big season coming in from him. And I don't really think it's going to be all that popular, however. I think he's still going to remain one of the league's more underrated players. And that's pretty sad. Now, Jalen Suggs, I expected a little bit more, and I expect a big season from him, but this game, 3 for 10 from the field, 11 points, definitely not ideal. But still, he does bring some value to the Orlando Magic with his defense. But if he can provide offensively and be a driving force for this team, then they could probably go far in this Eastern Conference, which really seems up for grabs on whoever is going to match up against the Boston Celtics. And really, the Celtics are going to be the favorite to make it to the conference finals. And if you're able to beat them, then it's basically anybody's game in the Eastern Conference. And not really much notable performances to come out of this game. No one on the Orlando Magic scored more than 20 points. And nobody on the Pelicans scored more than 20 points. So it was a pretty meh kind of game. Next game on this list is the Thunder. They ended up matching up against the San Antonio Spurs. And the Spurs, they were smart. They did not play Victor Wembanyama at all in this game, which they most definitely shouldn't. Victor should not even touch the court in a preseason game. We already know how good Victor is. And they also have several rookies that they also need to sort of develop and several players that they should improve on to sort of help Wemby out in this situation. Chris Paul also didn't play, which I think is also very important to note. But despite from that, Julian Champagne, I have no idea how to pronounce his name. I usually call him Champagne, which is kind of funny. But Julian ended up scoring 22 points and ended the game with 3 rebounds as well. So very fantastic game coming in from him. And he plays small forward, so who knows exactly what kind of value they're going to get out of him in this season. And let's see, some other players that ended up playing pretty well. Malachi Branham, forgive me if I messed up that last name. He ended the game with 12 points as well. And again, this was another game where it was just testing the bench, seeing exactly how much depth they actually have and who's going to make the rotation for the Spurs. And for the Thunder, they ended up starting some of their starters. Jalen Williams was in the game. Chet Holmgren played for only 9 minutes, which I think is a very solid number. I mean, he shouldn't be playing more than 12. And honestly, Jalen Williams should not be playing 17 minutes in a preseason game. Shai Gilgeous didn't play, which is fantastic. Good on them. But in the allotted time that they were playing, Jalen Williams ended up scoring 18 points in 17 minutes, and Chet Holmgren scored 10 points in 9 minutes. So that's some pretty solid production from those starters. And again, it is a preseason game, but still very important and very solid production coming in from them in this preseason game. Then there was also Dylan Jones, ended the game with 17 points, 8 for 11. And A.J. Mitchell for the Oklahoma City Thunder ended up leading the entire team in scoring with 19 points and going 8 for 13 from the field. And again, another game where just a bunch of bench players were being substituted in and just figuring out exactly what the depth situation is. And finally, the Utah Jazz ended up playing their first NBA team in the preseason. They ended up playing the New Zealand Breakers. Forgive me if I messed up the pronunciation of that team. But obviously, an NBA team is going to easily beat a team from New Zealand. And in this matchup against the Houston Rockets for the Jazz, excuse me, I don't know why Lauri Markkanen is playing 24 minutes in this game, but he did. And he ended with 17 points and also ended up shooting 3 for 11 from the field. So a majority of his points ended up coming at the line. And again, I just don't think Lauri Markkanen should be the player that you should be playing in the preseason. Jordan Clarkson played pretty well, 14 points, 5 of 9 from the field. And let's see, Keontae George also played pretty solid, 3 for 7 with 13 points as well. And he ended the game with 4 assists, so he was the rookie leader in assists, and that was the only stat that Victor Wembanyama did not dominate in the previous season. And again, just another game where everybody was sort of playing all their players. And Sengun was also playing in this game, which I also don't agree considering how he came off of a very bad injury in the previous season. So I think maybe saving him and not playing him for 22 minutes would be the goal. But aside from that, the Rockets, they ended up doing what they're doing. And they did claim that they have one of the deeper teams in the NBA. So why not try and use this deep team in the preseason matchup? It does not make any sense to me. But he did end up scoring 17 points, ended up recording 4 assists and 4 rebounds, along with 3 steals and a block. And then Jalen Green was also playing pretty well. He played 20 minutes and ended the game with 21 points. And he also shot very efficiently from the field, shooting 50% overall. And really, that's sort of like what we expect now from Jalen Green. He did go on a ridiculous streak last season where he was just dropping random 30-point games, efficient 30-point games as well, and making turnaround three-pointers at a ridiculous, like he did that several times in some of these games, and it was just like his confidence was all the way up here. And again, like I said before, a shooter with confidence is a very dangerous basketball player, and they need to expect that same production coming in from him almost every single night if they want to make something out of this season. And let's see, Amen Thompson also played in this game, shot 6 for 8 from the field, ended with 13 points as well, and also was able to record 3 rebounds and 1 assist. But again, this was just another game where everybody was sort of playing most of their bench and trying to see who was going to fit in the rotation. But for having a deep bench, it doesn't really seem like they have a deep bench. A lot of the bench players were missing a lot of shots in this game. But aside from that, that's all that I'm going to talk about with the preseason. I'm not going to recap the 76ers matchup against the New Zealand Breakers and that team. Aside from the fact that Jared McCain actually ended up shooting like pretty well and was a surprise for some Philly fans, mainly because a lot of people don't really expect much from McCain. But while he didn't shoot all that well from the field, 5 for 14, he did shoot rather well from 3, going 4 of 9 from 3, and ended the game with 15 points. So take that with a grain of salt. But that's all that I have for these preseason matchups. So now we're going to go ahead and talk about the WNBA semifinals matchup that's going to happen later tonight. And I'll talk about that right after this short break, so be sure to stay tuned.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC. to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts are found.